Hello, I think we are live now. Welcome to another webinar organized by our Turkish Center for Global and Area Studies at Necmettin Erbakan University. My name is Branislav Radelic, and I'm a professor of international relations at the Faculty of Political Science. Today, it is my big pleasure to welcome Dr. Dragan Pavlovic, currently at Regent's University London. Dragan, welcome. Dragan is an academic and consultant, as well as a prize-winning architectural designer. And he got degrees from Serbia, Spain, and the United Kingdom. He has taught at different places, including Oxford University, the University College London, Central St. Martin's, and Grenoble University. And his research focuses mostly, I would say, on globalization, global cities, and cultural production. So in preparation for this webinar, we decided to look at the post-COVID scenarios. And as a result of the pandemic, global cities are facing new challenges, which can direct post-pandemic transformation in different directions. In his presentation, Dragan will focus on the impact of a new paradigm of social relations and the issue of densification versus disaggregation. So while the former questions the impact of the so-called work from home model on global urban cultures, the latter challenges the emergence of a need for polycentricity and localization. Dragan, the floor, or the webinar platform, to be precise, is yours. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Branislav. I would like to thank you and the Turkish Center for Global and Area Studies for inviting me for this session. I think that this subject is quite interesting and probably for many people from different backgrounds, and I hope you're going to all enjoy this session today. What I would like to focus on a couple of scenarios about how we can estimate or how we can identify the progress with COVID in terms of post-pandemic scenarios, and then to see how that actually reflects to idea of global cities. And then, as I understand, and after that, we're going to have time for questions. So I'm very looking forward to hear your questions or maybe your thoughts, opinions. We're going to have time for that after the talk. We're all affected by these COVID pandemics. And then I think that one of the recent news that we have is obviously that there is another vaccine coming, actually two more. And we all really hope that these pandemics will end very, very much soon. Obviously, this is a hope in the end of the tunnel, but far away that we are at the end of the pandemics. It seems that right now we are pretty much at the very peak of it. There was a lot of predictions that in the autumn and the fall that we're going to have a second wave. For many countries, this is really the third wave, and it is really, if you think about the numbers, I think it is really, really worse than before. However, I like to keep a positive attitude towards this pandemics and hope that we're all going to pass through it and be all safe, and then we're going to be able to reflect in this world when the pandemics is over. And in order to give the hope to this, I think that my talk is going to be really one way I would try really to reflect objectively towards the facts that we have around the COVID and around the transformation of the cities on one hand, and on the other, it is some theories and maybe predictions that we can have according to these facts, and I would like to keep that more optimistic. So I would like really to start with some basic facts we probably all know, but it's really important to underline them at the beginning to understand how this is all going towards. So obviously, what we know for now is that COVID affected the cities in many different ways. And one of these is that obviously it is this lockdowns. So that changed completely the idea about how do we work, for example. This is something that is pretty much affecting us all in academia, in work, in any way. So many jobs are actually right now delivered from home. That affects not only the personal idea about what is the working place, what is the working space, what is the private, what is public, how do we perform. And it is also affecting the social relations, and also it affects the spaces. I'll just mention that a lot of working space right now is empty. It affects the value of that space, it affects the finance of the companies that are paying that, and so on. So out of that, we already have a lot of changes and a lot of new patterns that we're going to discuss later. But this is something that is really something we have to start with. Then the other thing is that many other businesses and cities are suffering from this. That is not really related only on office work. I'm particularly referring this for hospitality, which is really suffering quite badly. This is something that is actually a public space in a way in any city. Thinking about the restaurants, maybe even the public squares, they are actually the places where it is usually the place of high density. We right now try to prefer to keep the physical distance, which is at the beginning called social distance. Right now, I think it is corrected. It is physical distance, much better saying. But I think it affects really the idea of social distancing. So these businesses are suffering, and out of that, obviously, it affects really specific level of people. Private businesses, maybe small businesses, not really just the global companies. They're very local based, and they also have to adapt to this situation. Now, the another factor is that many of people, for example, in the United States, who are in a high level of income, they actually manage to escape the city, given that they don't have to stay to work and the office. They can work from home. They prefer to actually have a space more than what we have in the city, and to have a touch with the nature. So many of them, they actually start pushing the houses out of the city. And the demand of these houses, of the spaces that is rural, so not urban, is an increase. Versus to this, we have decrease of the prices in the cities. And some predictions say that doesn't gonna have for so long this kind of situation that might actually come back after pandemics. But what we have is actually some kind of new moments in the market of the property and real estate. I think this is also an important aspect of any city, in particular of the global cities. And then what that consequently will lead us is, according to some estimation, is that taxation is going to be different. That it's going to be then affecting those who actually have lower income, but not those who have a higher income, who have a possibility or maybe a privilege really to choose when and where they're going to stay, for how long. And then that actually implies many other things that what can happen in the cities in terms of social relations and also the developments of the cities in different directions. Now, what I think as well is that another thing that we have to cover is also the social aspect of it. So it's not just about how that the pandemic affects the business, but it is also how it affects each of us individually, as individuals, psychologically, emotionally, and of course in terms of health, but also as a collective, as a society. And I think this is also another aspect that we have to take on account. And I will actually give a point on this. That is really a huge, I think, subject to think about, because usually when we think about pandemics and recovery after that, especially in global cities, we usually start from this economic point of view. However, I think that this time we have to change this approach, and I think that this is really a new shift that this pandemic is bringing, that maybe this time we have to actually start from another point of view, which is not necessarily just economy, which obviously is important for all of us, but to see how that actually can be performed. So to summarize, I think that when we think about global cities and post-pandemic transformations, we have to take into account both economical factors and then social. If you want that, when I say social, I think all aspects of it. You can say cultural, you can say psychological, emotional, health, and so on. So these two aspects are something that I want to focus. Obviously, there are so many more, but because we have limited time, I will just really keep the focus on these two. Now, what is the perspective of pandemics and how this is going to end up? As we said, there is a vaccine here now. So we are hoping that this is the only way to stop these pandemics. All these ideas about social distancing and physical distancing are not giving enormous results, particularly not in the big cities. So somehow we actually have this kind of need of socialization that is stronger than the fear of being infected, because this is really the need for normal life. Obviously, we see that it is not really quite normal that we have isolation for such a long time. We are social beings. We need a socialization. And we also not people who, I mean, not really people, society, humankind, really the ones that is predominantly have to stay at home all the time. So we need real interaction. We need to be in open air. And obviously sometimes that is actually stronger than just the measures that we have. So the vaccine is given as the only hope that is going to actually stop these pandemics. And this is a lot of now unknown, a lot of things unknown there, because we still don't know how much time do we need really to get all people in the earth vaccinated. Do we need to do that very often? Is it enough only once? So we have to do every 6 months, or we have to do once in 2 years, and so on. Of course, I would just leave this open, as I think there are many more people who specialize in this area to talk about that. But what we can think as interested in cities, in architecture, and in the process of globalization is that I think we still have to kind of see how that's going to be developing, and to be able to understand all scenarios. I think that what we hear the most optimistic from the medicine field is that with the vaccination, we hopefully will be completely COVID-free by the end of next year. So probably in the next 12 months. It's quite a long period of time. Now, what is important here is actually the time scale, because we are already 1 year in lockdown in a way. It's really completely different mode of existence. And then if we actually extend this for another year, that's 2 years. And it's a really, really long time, particularly in the community, in society and community, in the world we live today, very connected and interrelated. So in that case, that can really make a strong impact on cities. I think this is really important to take on account. Now, if we know really what is the situation with COVID, what actually are implications in terms of economy and in terms of culture and society, then we have to think really how that affects the global cities. And when we come to global cities, again, I would like to introduce this term again, maybe just to be sure about what kind of concept of cities we're talking about. Because we have right now a lot of these concepts, particularly with the emergence of technology, is that obviously the cities are transforming very rapidly. And we all know about, for example, concept of smart cities, eco-cities, all sustainable cities. Previously, we had garden cities, we had industrial cities, we had post-industrial cities, we had creative cities. All these concepts actually different, but in one way they're actually overlapping. I like to see concepts of global cities is one that is not excluding all the other concepts, but it is referred particularly to the process of transformation. Cities are not something that is permanent and set in stone, although we might have some areas in the cities that are preserved, they're listed, and we want to keep them as a memory of past times. But cities are always transforming. New generations always bring something new. It reflects the culture and technology of the time. So cities are transforming all the time. A global city is a specific process of transformation that, according to theory of particularly Saskia Sassen, the sociologist and professor of Columbia University, who published the book Global Cities in the 90s, and that's how this term was launched pretty much, is about transformation of cities led by a neoliberal model of economy and idea of their regulations. And then that concept pretty much applied to 3 cities according to her theory. And at that time in the 90s, that was a leading global financial centers of global financial transactions. And those were New York, London, and Tokyo. So these three cities were leading in transactions. Obviously, the stock market and also the headquarters, all these financial institutions were there, and therefore they were called for global cities because of the power, financial power they had, the emergence of this financial growth, the type of industry they have, financial industries and services. It was not classical industrial production, but it was more about services. And then also it is the place of really high level of migration. Those cities were actually attractors of young talents. So I'm saying that particularly as a term, young talents, because those cities were really tend to attract people young for studies, for work, offering them possibility to develop their skills, to to be successful, to succeed in their careers. And what I would call is to achieve what we call in society and psychology pretty much self-realization. So that is all led by neoliberal model, and they actually exercise this high growth and really strong development, particularly in the 80s and in the 90s. My research was focused on London, case of London, pretty much, and we can talk about this case maybe specific up into the question, but generally these three cities were leading, and they were actually becoming a model of what we call global cities, because those transactions, though actually the performance, financial performance was not really related to the nation state, they were actually global, and those companies sitting there, they're actually global. So there are a lot of critics actually about this model. What we know in, for example, urban design, that the reflection of this model was always a symbolical skyscrapers that were emerged in specific area, the high density of these places, and financial districts. We know Wall Street in New York, we know City of London, and so on. And these places were actually not really the places for for living. They were actually empty during the bank holidays, the closes, and but actually become very strong, symbolic, and running really the game in the cities. Now, after that, of course, in the 2000s, with development and a kind of stronger process of globalization, these three cities were, of course, not alone. Global cities were never to be analyzed, experienced, and defined independently from each other. There were always a network of them. And so, of course, many other cities were actually coming to this list. And then I think what scholars and theoreticians have, there's always this kind of rank list about who are leading in what. And there was always this kind of list, which also reflects this competitive approach that neoliberal capitalism, that model has. There's always this kind of a competition, and who is going to be the first in the list. You have this list always of financial trusts for many institutions are actually giving this positions, of course, affecting the economies, not only on the cities, but also for entire regions and countries. Now, when we have this kind of model of cities, then it is really something that affects pretty much, I think, every country, especially in the Western society, but also we experience that quite a lot in Asia as well, although neoliberal model is not, for example, classical in China. They actually have collaborations specific with the companies in the United States, and then the high growth in China brought a bit different model. But effectively, the cities that emerges in the Far East and in China particularly, although they're actually existing in different systems, they actually take some elements are actually similar to the idea of global cities. And many companies are actually now try to establish the global presence. As far as we know for now, they're actually taking slightly different approach. But I think that if we just focus simply on the cities and just how the cities are developed, we don't really find a lot of differences in terms of morphology, in terms of the way how the system functions for transportation, social relationships, and so on. So I think we understand that global cities is something that exists as very strong centers of the power, financial power, economical power, place of self-realization for individuals, place where many people like to come and they're migrating, and then this is pretty much the source of their growth. Now, another aspect that is usually not much elaborated in this kind of academical fields, but I think they are, but not so much. And what I like to put the focus on and I think is really essential and comes before all of that, is the idea of symbolic production. For me, global cities are not just these cities transformation that led by neoliberal capitalism, that the emergence of this financial flows and then the growth in that level. It is first and before all of that, global cities are symbols that actually make all this system possible to function. Simply because cities are not really as something like an architectural building or maybe interior space that we can perceive instantly. We cannot see it. We cannot really encompass it immediately in one site, if we can at all. Even if you go to the high skyscraper in the city, you might actually have this perception where you are. It's kind of the size of the city. However, that is not permanent. As long as you go down, I don't know, to the streets, then you don't really have this perspective. So city is not something that we can see like a building. And it is really existing in the level of symbolic production. And in the level of the symbols, we have to imagine city. We have to kind of have an image, or we have to have some kind of idea about what is the city in which we want to come. And that symbols are actually constructed on the collective level, something that we all believe together in, and something that we all produce in a way with our action, but can also be produced by those who are kind of main players. I'm using this term main players from the field theory. So those who actually establish their positions and they have this position of decision making and then can maybe project the idea of what the city can be, although not entirely, but maybe to have a mainstream. So cities are actually existing as well on the level of images, on the level of ideas, on the level of discourse, on the level of discussions. Even the one that we have today as one process of making these symbols, or maybe imagining a future of it. And if we think then global cities as symbols, and then we have to understand that if we want to think about post-pandemic transformation, then to see first how these symbols can be transformed. What do we believe in cities? Do we really have this idea about global cities as a place of self-realization, for example, individual self-realization, or maybe the place of the growth as we had before? Does this pandemic affect this idea on collective level of just individual level? So I think if we focus on that symbolical production side, then our understanding of cities and maybe the way how that can be developed can give a bit different light on it. So I would like to focus on these symbols, and of course that will then can be discussed in more specific cases of economy, transportation, technology, and so on. Now, what is the global cities a symbol of? As I said, it is a symbol of power, it is a symbol of financial growth, and a symbol of youth coming. And what I think is important to understand here is that global cities are also the symbol of vitality. Now, vitality is very, I think, important term to be used today, because I think this is something that actually is the key for understanding that transition, actually, and this process of COVID, and then after that, what's going to be recovery. Today, we pretty much use the term resilience, and it's nothing wrong with that. I think this is really important idea about how to really resist and recover after some stress, and how to really take the best of it and then use it in our own benefit. However, I think that this resilience is not, I think when we say vitality, it is more than just a resilience. It's not just about this ability, psychological ability of surviving maybe some stress and then taking the best of it and moving forward, growing out of it, but it's also ability really to resist and maybe to have immunity. I think this is really key word today in this pandemic time, to have immunity to some stress and actually to be vital. And it is not just about that. I think it's also the idea of growth of global cities. It's just really related to the idea of vitality. For example, just the rate of the rise of this of new talents, for example, in one city is actually taken as very important fact to understand how economy will grow in that city. So the higher rate of immigration in the city is particularly with the young talents, for those who actually have skills, will actually increase the possibility of these people producing something new, for example, innovations, and to perform better. And then, of course, that affects the growth of the city and also the recovery of the city. So vitality is a very important thing. And in post-COVID, I think we have to think about 4 main ideas of vitality. So I would like to focus maybe a couple of words about that. So the first of this vitality point is, of course, health vitality. The systems have to be in the cities vital to survive the COVID. And what actually will attract people after post-COVID is actually the health system. If the cities have this kind of health vitality in the future, that will actually give a trust for those people who want to come to city, and also for those who don't want to leave the city, to kind of abandon it completely. Because what we see, as I said, now in global cities, there's a kind of a trend of all those people who can actually escape it, that they do that naturally. And that also affect really all other cities, but because global cities are kind of a leader icons, kind of ideal of all cities want to achieve. So health vitality, and then means all sort of things, not only the facilities, but also the ability of the health system, infrastructure, but also many other innovations that we have today. For example, these little hubs, they're designed like a little containers, mobile, that can give the first aid to the local communities rather than having these people situated in the big hospitals and travel. They can actually be occurred maybe in these little hubs, and so on. So that is really important points. So health vitality. Now, the other one is obviously it has to be vital in terms of labor conditions. And then when we come to the labor condition, I will just say one fact. Obviously, in New York, as we said, because of this COVID situations, these financial institutions such as banks and insurance companies, they actually have the people working from office. But the prediction is, as soon as there is a vaccine, they will have a fine excuse to ask these people coming back to the office. And I think, of course, that is again a new symbol of the health vitality vaccine. Okay, that we have a symbol, and we can move on as it was before. However, I think this is a new shift right now that will determine the way how we're gonna develop the global cities, because at this stage there is a new tech companies that actually entering that field because the prices of these properties are going down, because obviously many of these spaces are abandoned. For example, in New York, the companies such as Facebook, Google, all these tech leaders who are actually taking these spaces, and what they're trying to do is to offer to the people the blended the blended version of work. So they don't want really to abandon work from home as completely. They want people to preserve some of the benefits of working from home, as we experienced now in COVID, and then to use it for the benefit of growth of the company. And this culture of the labor obviously is already implemented in these tech companies, although not really inserted in the heart of global cities like we are doing right now. And I think that is some sign of the big shift of how global cities will change. And this is important just because the neoliberal model, just generally capitalist model, is all based around this leisure labor division. Although it is really the idea of capitalism and this neoliberal growth particularly is to have enough money, enough funds really to experience your life. Obviously, it is the leisure is the key. So to have the best possible experience in the city, obviously, in order to kind of earn that, you will need to work a lot. So many times people don't even have to experience their life because they have to work quite a lot. And in these global cities, obviously, that experience of the leisure has to be extremely high density, high intensity, because the time of you have to experience it is very short. And I think that promise of leisure vitality is right now changing, because leisure is not necessary just really the time you're going to have in club, maybe after the office hours, or maybe meeting some people in some very fancy spaces or places in the city, in rooftops or so on. But it's also maybe experiencing the life with your family, because we are discovering that that beauty right now all over again. So if you think about individual, the self-realization, that is again one aspect of it. Self-realization in terms of consuming the symbols of individuality, of success, such as, for example, I don't know, the promotions in the company, or maybe the income you have in the figure of number, and then also the places you actually go that's consume. I don't know, the holidays you're kind of consume as well. So what you're buying as well. So all these elements were something that were actually symbols of success. And self-realization, this is something, for example, that Erlich Beck, a sociologist, German, used to call individualization. And he used to contradict it to the other process of self-realization, which is much more related to self-awareness, which he called individuation. I think in this individuation, maybe right now is coming more than individualization. So in other words, instead of consuming the products of neoliberal symbols of self-realization, we might actually try to do that ourselves. And the process of really being more home, more with family, kind of putting these health issues and health well-being in front of any kind of income. Because of course we need to live, we need the income, but I mean, how much we need for this in life. And of course, what is the leisure? What we have with free time? How we can combine this sustainable process of working time that we spend in performing, and then also the time that we have with the loved ones. So I think this is really the key shift, and the vitality of the city to provide people to something which is not only individualization, but rather individuation. That means more place for family. I don't know, investment maybe in the kindergartens, in schools, and the better flats, because all these global cities experiencing the housing crisis with the prices and so on. Big subject for that. But I mean, obviously that will require a bit different approach. So leisure and labor, I think it's really important aspect of it. Work from home is actually triggering a lot of things that we have to take into consideration. And new culture of the labor that coming with the tech industry is actually bringing a new spirit to what we call the transformation, post-pandemic transformation of global cities. And there is another type of vitality I would like to kind of continue with this labor and leisure, and it is, I think, the cultural, maybe mental vitality. And this is really the process of understanding the city as the place for everyone, in terms that it is not just really related to this global leaders in terms of the finance and the businesses, but also the individuals, for those who actually are doing everyday life, but they're trying kind of their own the way of success, which is not necessarily related to this the big players. So I think that all of these aspects are actually important to take on account to estimate this process of transformation. And let me see. I think that there is another one that I want to mention. Yeah, of course, that's another, I said for vitality. I forgot to say the social vitality. So that's really the fourth one, which actually referred back to idea of migration. And it is really idea about what is the growth of the population of the cities after the post-COVID pandemic. So I think that this is really coming to this idea of density of the cities. Do we really need cities to be so much dense? And is there any model of globalization that will not require the increase of density in the cities? Because this is right now presumption of the economic growth. Because if you have a high density of the people in one place, of course, you increase the spending, you increase the consumption of every sort, not only the food and energy, the transportation, culture, content, and also on. So more people together exchanging whatever, they actually have more production. And but right now, of course, with the COVID, we learned that it's not just about proximity and it's not about density, because in these cases, we don't really have that vitality of health. And then, of course, that is the model that we have to take on account. And the transformation will actually go to reducing this density and maybe thinking about something more sustainable solution. Of course, the question here that rises is sustainability. So it's not just about the carbon emission. It's not just about being green and the consumption of energy, green energy, and so on. It is actually about the population growth. So in terms of how we actually sustainable grow. And I'm not talking about the numbers. I'm talking actually about the spread of the resources that we have, and I really believe we have enough. But I think that there has to be taken into account, really. So in what density do we have actually? What is the level of the density that we can still kind of be sustainable? So that is a very big question. And then what actually follows from that is, really, do we need that kind of migration? Really? So I think that the key is really what is the globalization, because globalization model until now was actually existing on the level of the cities. Rarely will have all these people migrating to big cities. Actually, majority of them will actually go to big cities, although that actually represents the states, and it belongs to the law of the country, of the nation state. We actually have really the influence of the cities. And then cities actually becoming kind of state within the state. It's so much important in terms of economy and governance. But right now, I think with this idea of migration might actually shift, because if not necessarily all to be together in one place, for example, work from home, use of technology, then how much then we can actually connect the little towns that are maybe more sustainable and then give equal opportunity to everyone, just like as they are, for example, in global city, and think about having what is called localization. That means that you can still perform in your local area, but still be present in global market and global scene, and maybe something kind of more sustainable model of globalization. So the social vitality is important. So how much actually cities can offer this the diversity in terms of social performance and social governance. I think I covered this kind of key aspects. I think we're pretty much running out of time, so maybe we can go to question just to summarize all this talk. What I think about global cities is that how that will transform in the future. I think what we have to think is really in the level of symbolic production. So how we understand these symbols, because this is really the key of understanding the cities, and taking all the considerations about how COVID performed, what we learned so far, how they change our lives, individual lives and social life, and then how that will have positive predictions that the vaccine will maybe solve that ideally next year, maybe at the end of the next year. What we actually learned is that the four key symbolic vitalities will actually identify the direction in which transformation will have to go in global cities. As I said, these four ones were health vitality, social vitality, the vitality, leisure, labor, that's a condition, and then cultural, mental vitality, referring to the idea of individualization, individuation, this kind of the key goals of our personal lives, what we learned. And then finally, how that will actually perform at the end, it really depends on all of us, because although the symbols might actually be produced in this kind of key places that can distribute this image widely and I think impose it in the global domain and the public domain, I think that each individual, believing or not believing this symbol, will actually contribute or not contribute to this change. So what I believe is that right now, I think more than ever, that each individual citizen in these global cities will actually have more power than before in order to be part and all to take the part in this transformation. Okay, I think that maybe we are pretty much up to time. I would not like to keep this talk maybe too long. Maybe we can open the time for your questions.
Well, thank you so much. That was excellent and very insightful. You've touched upon so many important issues, but before we really move on with the questions from our attendees, I would like to make some small remarks here. I really like how you've approached the point of self-realization, and I couldn't stop thinking about Hans' concept of achievement subject, which is very much related again to the talent, global cities, and so on and so forth. And as you were mentioning, you work sometimes even 20 hours a day. So to what extent then do you enjoy? So in relation to that, actually, I did not hear you mention the concept of burnout, which Han is very keen on. So where do you, in all that discourse, before we move on with the questions, really would place the problem of burnout? Because if we are talking about self-realization, if we are talking about achievement subject, if we are talking about the extremely competitive and service-oriented society in the context of global cities, are we then at a big risk of major burnout, especially in the current climate, which then, of course, can be linked to other issues such as depression and potentially suicide?
Yes, as I said, I call this social culture, but pretty much my first idea was mental vitality. But of course, I extended a bit of culture because it's, you know, it encompasses so many more things. And the culture of burnout, I think it is also, there's a culture of burnout. I think, unfortunately, in some culture of companies, they have, you know, consider this very seriously. But of course, it is something like on the list that is normally happen. And I don't think that it should normally happen in any of working conditions, that we have to accept the fact that there is going to be burnout as a consequence of your performance, and it's completely normal. I don't think so. And I hope that with this pandemic, obviously, many people experience mental health issues. And this is something that we should not be ashamed to share, because I think this is normal. And I think this is something that will give us really the insight about our life goals. So do we really accept this culture of burnouts or not? Is it something that we should really kind of consider as a normal kind of maybe collateral damage of kind of our goal of self-realization, or it is really a kind of something that really change our personalities? And I hope that because right now many people experience this burnout, even with COVID, because they cannot stay in isolation or they're concerned about the future. I hope that they're actually becoming even more present in mass media, for example, and hopefully that will rise really the awareness of that problem. And that will become a new standard for this mental vitality, or even health vitality, but obviously mental health vitality, that it is important. I don't think that the city can be vital just with having so many cases of burnouts and just replacing people by being on recovery. I think this is the model what we have right now, because the most important is the performance. I think it's a waste of the talents in that way. And it is discouragement in a way that maybe those people don't really want to come to perform anymore. And that questions really this model. I hope that these tech companies, well, obviously they're not better really in terms of working time. You need really to perform alone. But I mean, giving this flexibility of time that you might actually want maybe to spend a day at home, because that day really you need to stay home. Or you feel to have to stay home, but perform similarly or the same or even better, will actually change the attitude towards, you know, our life altogether. So how do we work, and why do we work? You know, why do we have all this kind of performance, you know, quest? Simply, I think the burnout comes really from the fact that we expect too much, and then we cannot perform physically as much. One of the problem with that is obviously sourcing. So we need maybe more people to perform the same thing, where it's not really competitive model, maybe not good enough. We need collaborative model. I think it's emerging right now. However, I still see this kind of lists of you know, pyramidal list or lines, so kind of rank lists. I think it is really the cycle. You know, it doesn't really matter. It's a collective really approach. So this collective work, I think, will hopefully kind of be a solution for the burnouts, because even if people are kind of working so hard, at least if not alone, then there might actually be a support.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. Let me then read out some of the questions we have received in the meantime. So do you think there will be a shift in global cities so that New York, London, and Tokyo will maybe drop their position and be replaced by some other places? And this can be also linked to another question, which was about developing countries and your view on maybe that even moving towards that world.
If you speak about the shift in New York, London, Tokyo, I think that there is a shift. And if they're going to lose position, I don't really think, to be frank, really, that they're going to lose position I think in this stage, particularly not immediately after the pandemic, because I think that what history teaches is that those cities who actually have this kind of position the transition and transformation are not something that happens in one day or in 1 year. It is really the process. Now, again, the key, if they're going to preserve it for a long-term period, is again the quest of vitality. If they keep this to become a vital, then can actually still be a part of it. Now, this is only if we still consider that this model of globalization we know by now exists in future, that we still have some kind of leaders in the field, just as I said, to be competitive. Now, if we actually, all society goes a bit in kind of globalization, decentralized model where many cities will emerge equal, then the collaboration between those all those cities will become actually the key of their vitality. And in that case, maybe in this collaborative environment, we not need really to rank any of the cities who are actually the leader, but actually can be really spread in some kind of network. And if we have a network, in that case, we cannot exactly predict what exactly will happen. It will always kind of be a result of different influences, which I think is much more natural process. Because if we don't really have a fear of losing the first position, the second, if we actually all have to perform as together, so one fails, all fail, I think that in that case, the collaborative culture will actually emerge as better. That's my optimistic prediction. But as I said, like immediately after pandemic, what history teaches is that I don't think that something will radically change immediately. It will actually take a bit of time. At the end of the day, I mean, you can take even an example of London. London was, a capital of British Empire for a very long period of time. Even any kind of Western city, maybe Paris and so on. So it doesn't really, it has this kind of heritage of kind of attracting people from all over the place and kind of having headquarters there and kind of being the place of meeting. So, for example, in that case, London will not really lose completely that kind of role because there is a tradition. Same for New York and maybe Tokyo. It will change maybe the role in the future, but I mean, everything that is achieved, I think that doesn't really disappear so easy.
And what about the developing?
I think that in developing countries, as far as I understand right now, situation is that developing countries has a lot of more vitality at this stage. Especially if they're not overgrown cities. And I think that with the youth and the young talents, which actually with this decentralization, for example, of education or so on, might actually have better chance to exchange the ideas and to perform in the global scale and global market from their local places. And I think that there's a big really chance for those who are not overgrown. Even for this neoliberal model, they actually see these cities as a great source that are completely not exploited yet. But I mean, in positive way of thinking, if you really think about vitality, really think something sustainable. When I say vitality, it is really a natural process of emerging of the new ideas. It is not referring only to new generations, young, but also to all generations, to everyone who actually have ability to transform and to stay vital. To be able to innovate. I think that these emerging countries, they actually have a lot of more chances after all this pandemic, really. And if you also want to see the numbers, of course, the smaller cities are actually coming better through this pandemic.
Right, thank you. We also have a question here. What are the pros and cons of living in a global city during a pandemic?
Pros and cons, that's a very good question.
That's fun, yes.
Well, I think the cons, obviously, is that I would actually say that if you take an example of maybe London, New York particularly, I think it's the lack of nature, obviously, and the lack of space. Living in the big cities is actually not the same as being in the countryside because you always have restriction with the space, no matter how big or small you have. It's unnatural because you have high density of population there, and everything in cities is smaller, and all is shared. And then in parks, for example, if you want to go to park, again, you have to keep this distance. You cannot really be relaxed 100%. Whereas in the nature, if you have a little garden, then of course it's yours. And I don't know, in New York and Tokyo, for example, really high kind of density and urban environment. And of course, the lack of nature is tremendous. You have the Central Park, I don't know, Hyde Park in London. That's fine, but I mean, still, it is public space. We still have to keep some measures. Whereas in the countryside, you don't. So that's cons, really, obviously, that lack of space, lack of nature. What is the positive? It might have the infrastructure of the health protection. because in these places, maybe the hospitals are bigger, you have more staff, and probably that of the health system is really going to that area. However, this is just I have to really say that it's my estimation. I haven't have experience really more facts about how the systems are really working. Obviously, we had a lot of very difficult situations in big cities as well to kind of to hospitalize all these people who need support for that. But assumingly, if this big centers are in the cities, you might actually have stronger infrastructure for health supports, health vitality.
Right. I also think there was actually a comment here that it does make a big difference if you are single or live with a family and how you handle the.
Well, I think that in this case, it is really important that each of us really ask that question for ourselves. I think for those who are single, you might actually, I mean, it's really individual. But I mean, generally thinking like logically that if you're alone, you might actually have a problem, big problem of being lonely because you cannot meet friends and family as well. You might actually have this need to have a family or friend of being with someone. But then although with families, then if there's a restriction with the space available for everyone, you know, there is a increase of the rate of divorces, and that's like in America, I think 30%. In the United Kingdom recently, the figures are around 25%. And it's higher than last year. It is not really something, for example, that was a high peak as well, maybe in 2014. But again, it's going on right now. So what is the reason for that? Many times it's not just that maybe the couples or maybe the family never actually had time really to sit together and to know who they are. Because of the life, you know, we experience in life, go to work, go to social events, but actually how much effective time the couples are spending together, maybe with the kids, it's really unknown. And maybe they develop their relationship in completely different ways. And right now in this situation that is not working. And also I think what is probably much more important is that also many of these families experiencing the problem, and individuals as well, financial part because of the loss of jobs. And that actually put a lot of stress to them and would obviously, you know, end up with breaks. So I think that both individuals and families are affected in different ways. But again, I would not like to generalize this question because it is really individual, very, very, very individual. I think this is where we actually have a shift, I think, because in this case, we finally maybe have a time to spend a bit time with ourselves and to think what do we really, really want from our life. And this is really going back to the question of individualization. Are we going to consume that to our life through the symbols, or are we going to really think about what is important for us?
What about the concept of new normal? How much do you agree with the concept itself?
Well, what is new normal now? Is it about wearing the mask? I think, for example, wearing the mask, I noticed really from students, particularly students coming from example from Asia and especially in Japan, they have that culture already. I mean, even the normal flu, they will always have a mask. And in their culture, probably they will not maybe understand us in the Western and in Europe that we don't really wear the mask with the normal flu. That was completely normal for us, that you can just have a kind of whip and that's it. But they had actually that idea of protecting others, even with the small flu. And if we in the Western society have to accept that normal, I think that's fine. However, the social and physical distance is something that is probably going to affect every one of us in different ways. And new normal that's one way of how to kind of think about protecting each other from ourselves or from each other's selves. But new normal, as I think that maybe this question referred to, is also this idea about asking population to accept some measures which are not something that we want, that is not going to help us really to have everyday life we used to have. It's going to affect us mentally and maybe physically or maybe in terms of financially and so on. So I think that there is a lot of tension right now with the governments imposing this kind of measures that are becoming new normal. For example, to accept that we always cover our face, so that we always have to give permission to someone to measure our temperature, or maybe to have this vaccine passports and so on. I think this kind of is very concerning. It's something that maybe a lot of people are not willing to give this. Of like the habits that they have before, and there's a lot of tension right now before the governments and those people who don't want to accept this. I think this tension is just really high, and I think it's because that both government and I think the people who are not in government actually are equal in front of virus, and I think that basically we don't have the answer how to deal with this. What is the new normal is probably we don't really have, how we're going to live with the virus. Maybe that's really the most scary thing. This new normal is really the assumption that we're never going to get rid of COVID. And I think this is another scenario, obviously. It is possible that maybe vaccine will not really solve the problem. Maybe the, COVID will remain as any other flu. We might evolve and, adopt to this and become immune and resistant or vital to this, or maybe not. Now, this is really a huge question. I don't know if you have time. I think that the new normal is not something, it's quite complex to talk about what is the new normal. But in this kind of negative connotation, I don't think really that it is sustainable in the long term.
Yes, that is the whole issue, because often it has been used as a cover-up for something abnormal.
Abnormal, yeah.
And presented in that way.
I think there is also this kind of the value of the social media that actually connect people with sharing this opinion about the new normal. So how they deal with COVID. And obviously, this social media, there are a lot of different ideas and thoughts. And I think this is another huge issue. I think confusion can really happen if we start kind of having the information that are not really trusted, or maybe that we're not kind of examined quite enough. So I think it's normal, really, in any kind of crisis situation. There's a lot of this kind of misinformation, so confusion, which of course scare us. I think what we have to do is really to stay calm and to try to approach this very rationally, to think really what actually works for us as a collective to move on. I think this idea of collectivism, that we have the only way really to survive all this is to protect each other. We cannot protect ourselves, just kind of be in prison. We have to think how we can protect each other. And I think this is really something new, completely new.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Let me read out another one. Do you think this pandemic will cause a new suburbanization process, both in global cities and the other metropoles?
I think so, and I think it's not sustainable again, because sooner or later it end up really again kind of rising the density. We might actually have the donut syndrome, like we had with Detroit a long time ago, when the city center was completely abandoned and the suburbs grew up, and then you have just like a black hole in the middle of the city, and then low population going out. But then after that, they tried to return this back and to change the content in the center of the city, and then try to make it alive. I don't really think, but there is, for example, some kind of the tendency of having this living in the nature, but particularly off-grid. For example, you probably know this concept of grid living. That means that you're not depending of any of energy delivery. For example, you're not connected to the system, energy system, electricity, so you don't have to pay the bills. You're not connected to the water supply. In the urban environment, obviously, that is out in the nature, in the forest, for example, in the middle of nowhere, where you can actually sustainably living, and all the source of energy will be renewable. You have a sun, you have a wind, you have water, and all of these, they actually you have to have, of course, the batteries, and then you collect the energy. And I think this is a great concept, but I think it becomes so massive that it looks completely the point. Because then in that case, you will have actually the settlements, the little towns, or villages, or towns that will be off-grid. But sooner or later, they will have kind of to establish some kind of connection, a collaboration in a way, because that's natural. This is how every city was actually formed. Once upon a time, every city was a small village with maybe a settlement of a couple of houses that actually attracted more people, or the vitality of the population that was so big that actually grew. And then in the long-term period, particularly with the resources, that city grows. And I think that will be happening the same with if we have a settlements with off-grid. Another way around is that actually we have equal spread of these all-grid settlements all around the globe. And then we don't really have cities anymore, which is, I think, utopian idea, but let's say that it's possible. Then again, all these little hubs, or that little islands of settlements could be connected, of course, the internet and all so on. But then the transportation will be then the key here. Now, do we have infrastructure to connect all of these or not? And of course, it depends really on technology. What technology we're going to use in future in order to travel? Are we going to still relate to the roads or railroads or air? or I saw that there is a recent this kind of the test with this tube, with this high speed tube that might actually go underground or top ground. But again, you need to build infrastructure. And of course, while we have cities like a global cities, then the infrastructure is more sustainable in a way because the density is okay. It's kind of more close, and then of course you can actually establish that. Now suburbs, again, I don't think it's still urban environment. Although it's a suburb, that doesn't mean it's not urban. It is urban, and in many cases, suburbs are not regulated so much infrastructurally as the center cities. And in that case, that might be a problem. We think about maybe the huge cities in India, maybe in Brazil. There are a lot of cities like this in the world. Global cities are just ideal of the city. And it's just, that many cities would like to have this kind of system in a positive way, how that function. But I think that, of course, we have to think about other cities that can become maybe a world city, but not necessarily a global city.
Right. Well, this brings me to the point that I had before. So what is then, since you are an architect by training, so what is the design of future cities like?
Okay, in this field, like if I speak really to think about architectural design, I would like to really to project this my vision, and obviously it's utopian, but not much. I think it is really all architects actually, and creativity is really inventing something new, innovating, and to the benefit of everything. So my personal vision, this is a bit out of just predictions and analysis. It's something that I would like to see in the future, obviously in the design, not only in the buildings, but also in the cities and urban development is, again, that vitality, but that vitality, they can be reflected in the built environment. That means that we have to kind of understand how the architecture actually make us healthy. Now, this is a big movement, of course, we have with well-being architecture, that's how it's called, then off-grid architecture, sustainable architecture. But I think that this architecture is pretty much relating us to, again, a very, I would say, materialistic approach to it. So how do we actually create a space? But I think beyond that, there's for example, one movement in the United States that is formed by doctors, eminent doctors in the hospitals, professors. They actually had a lot of cases with healing people and so on in regular hospitals. But actually, they started this idea of post-materialistic society. And they actually tried to understand how our brain works. And this is really about consciousness, about perception, cognition as well, spatial cognition and so on. And there are a lot of findings there that maybe we can have another session on that. But this post-materialistic approach, I think, is something fresh and something really new, something a completely new area that we still have to understand and to discover. And in that field, I see that the design actually has a really important impact and role. So architecture and design that actually take on account not only the health vitality, as I said, but also mental vitality, that actually can create the condition in which we at least can feel healthy or protected just by design. And I'm not talking just about maybe organizational space, spatial position, not only with the use of the energy, sun, and so on, orientation, but also with understanding of all other aspects that built environment has in the space, in terms of how it affects our perception, our cognition, and all aspects of our existence. So that kind of a design that actually take all these aspects. It's not just about the approach that we have. I think for now we really have this kind of old-fashioned pattern of design that is based on materialistic. But I think this post-materialistic is actually opening a new understanding that the medicine is giving us now. And I think that architects have to learn that much more.
Mm-hmm. Since the center, Turkish Center for Global and Area Studies, is based in Turkey, and therefore knowing about how Istanbul was positioned in the past, and I would say it was a global city for centuries. So how would you assess, for example, a city of that size and kind nowadays?
Well, I have to be honest. I've been very briefly to Istanbul just last year, the first time in my life, and I was really excited actually to visit that city. It has been, how to say, the point of interest of mine for a very long time. How it was really, really brief. So I cannot really speak for someone who actually, researched Istanbul as a case. But on the site, I didn't really, could spend this amount of time in Istanbul to know more. But with all aspects that I could see, and in terms of parameters and the research that I could do, I think that Istanbul, of course, with the history it has, and geographical position and everything, it is really the city with a lot of vitality. And I think that this vitality has many different layers. It's not only historical. And I think, of course, it has a lot of possibility to kind of develop and to merge. So it's really, really huge potentials. I think there is a lot of infrastructural investments there, and then developments, I would say. And I think that in that case, of course, I think the strategy for the city is directed in this stage, or really to aim very high. And I think it has a lot of potential really to take this. As I said, the global cities are not really only this three right now anymore. I think from 2000s, many of these are on the list. Istanbul is one of them. Like how they can actually develop really to this state that can be recognized by many people all over the world as the place, I would say, of vitality. So it has to be produced, I think, symbolically in that way. And when I say symbolically, it not necessarily means only to be kind of advertisement and propaganda about, okay, come to Istanbul. Many symbols are actually constructed through the facts and through the experience of reality. So many cities actually have really some achievements that are becoming so important and so mythical that actually become symbols of it. And I think, Istanbul has a lot. There is another thing that I didn't really speak a lot, but I mean, researching, for example, London as a global city, I found out that historical heritage has been playing an important part of it, particularly in the culture production. And this kind of reinventing of this culture based on historicism was important for London. And that could actually be also a good pattern for many other cities with such a long-term histories, for example, as Istanbul.
Mm-hmm. We've got some new questions here. Is it possible to create spaces that address everyone? And does that not mean that we are then thinking of a homogeneous society?
When we do architecture design, of course, we cannot select who is going to use it at the end. Of course, if you have specific groups, but you usually make it really for the users as more objective as possible. There's always a lot of aspects that you have to take on account when you design a building, but it doesn't mean uniformity at all. All architectural design and all architects will actually always be for diversity. So the diversity is something very important. I mean, we have really bad examples of architecture, uniform architecture in the world. And I think in all architects will actually not really advocate that. They will not really design something like this unless it is really some kind of strategy. So, I mean, designing the buildings for all doesn't mean that it has to be uniform. It doesn't have to be really, all the same. That's why we have creativity. That's why we actually always try to innovate and to reflect on specific sites or specific locations, specific culture, specific need of the people. So I think that the diversity is really the key.
Okay, and I would say this is our last question for this session, and then we let you go. Do you have any idea, any data about to what extent the unemployment rates caused by the economic situation due to the pandemic have really made people move out of global cities, have inspired really migration in that respect?
Exact figures are rarely published. I think I don't have really exact figures about how many people lost their jobs. I think that probably the numbers will never be finite at this stage. Probably we'll have this at the end of the pandemics. But what I know on my research that obviously you have this kind of high income and low income individuals, and then a lot of government supports for people who lost their jobs. Of course, that's a question if it's enough and how much those people receive that. Of course, that vary in different countries. But what is the case right now is that those people who actually have a lower income might actually have a less chance to have escape a strategy. That means that those with high income that I can find in this material I have could actually buy property out of the city, or maybe sell one that they have and buy a new one. Those who don't have this ability or lost the jobs, they might actually sell and buy something instead. But I mean, those who actually have just a rent obviously don't have this possibility, so will rarely be able to move out. Now, what is it? There are also some factors that many people actually, particularly those who are immigrants in the cities, that actually went back to countries of their origin. And that's a new trend. So obviously that's one of the scenarios. So for those people who came to perform, maybe work for a very long period of time, but of course with this situation cannot really sustain their life in the big cities, might actually go back to the state of the origin. I think that obviously, you know, that is the trend. We don't still have enough information because many people are here, there, and here they're migrating. So I think that what actually in that scenario is happening. So obviously that's quite a lot in the big cities, particularly in London, maybe New York, is that actually will bring a new kind of visibility of those people who remain in the city. For example, Saskia Sassin wrote a very nice. I refer to the academic who actually established this idea of global cities. So 2 years ago, she wrote an article that she spoke about visibility of powerless people. So she actually refers to those people who are writing pretty much about maybe housing crisis, all these things that used to happen in a couple of years. And her prediction, for example, is that this powerless would become even more visible and more powerful than ever, because I think that there is a lot of room for them right now to exercise their ideas and their visions. And those people particularly will probably, for those who couldn't escape the city and would like to escape the city, I think it would be probably very frustrating for them not being able to, escape the city if, they want to, but they cannot. So, very complex question. I think the fewer figure will come, but I think what is sure, and I think that my prediction is that the situation that we had with this kind of urban unrest, I would call it, we saw it in the United States, we saw it in Europe, will actually rise quite a lot simply because we don't have as a society answer to all these challenges that we have right now. We cannot see virus, this kind of invisible enemy. And then we need really to do something. And I think that will arise quite a lot, energy, I think, out on the public space to emerge. So we can only see how that will be directed. But I think not bad for this. I mean, obviously that will reduce the vitality of the global cities because all these people are actually not coming but leaving. But on the other hand, those talents who used to perform in global cities might actually do very well in the cities of the origin. And then actually will turn all this stream towards what we call globalization.
Right. Well, you've touched upon now. Actually, we don't let you go now, since you've touched upon it yourself about the unrest and Black Lives Matter. Right in the US, I would like you actually to reflect upon that a bit, not only in the American context, but on the relevance of the whole event on some potential places around the world that are facing maybe something similar. This is the last one, I promise.
No, that's fine. I'm actually very enjoying this question, so I'm okay. If you're okay, then it's fine.
We are absolutely fine.
I have my glass of water, so I'm okay. I think that, unrest, I think it's really, I will start really with my personal feeling. I have to be honest, because I was really touched with Black Matters Life movement. It happened in the United States. It has a reflection here in the UK. And I think it will have also the reflection in Europe altogether in those places where you have a high rate of migration. But the Black Matter Life is not just about migration, particularly because it started in the United States. And it is really a question that is not, I think it's a problem that is not existing only now. It is really long-term period. Right now it erupted. And I think one reason for that obviously is this oppressive environment that we live today with COVID, because you're scared every time you go out from your house. And even there's absolutely no one around you. You're always kind of turning around yourself and thinking, what, if I'm safe or not? Do I have to touch this or not? But I mean, fascinating for me was that all these people were actually went out to the streets, risking being infected with the COVID. There is on the BBC I saw there was an interview with one a lady who was in riots and Black Matter Lives that matters, but Black Lives Matter. It was here in London, and the speaker asked her, "So, well, you're risking your life. Do you think that this is safe? What you're doing?" And she said that, well, I think that our problem is bigger than just a COVID. In terms that she said that, for her, the bigger threat was actually the situation that she feels like a Black woman than a COVID. And I think that really raises a lot of problems, obviously, that we have in society. Then, you have to risk your life. And I think that this is kind of more important because this is the only time you can actually be heard or seen. And no matter if it's a COVID time, that it's not going to stop you to do it. So I think that obviously it really opened up a lot of questions for our society to understand this. Why is that? And obviously to reflect on it. I think it changed quite a lot already. And I think the cultural, it's always already made a shift. And I hope that this kind of idea of a culture of tolerance and acceptance will actually even grow further. But I think it's really interesting to see. And also the place of that exercise of what I call unrest, but in this case, it's really a riot, was a street, and it's a public place. And it refers back to what Saskia Sassen again said about powerless or powerlessness, so how these people actually become visible. I think her prediction was correct in that case, that these people actually become more powerful than actually appear to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would say on that note, we will thank you for your time and for taking part in the webinar series of the Turkish Center for Global and Area Studies. And let's see, maybe in a year's time when the whole thing is over in relation to the pandemic, and we have some new stories to tell, that we can actually organize a new round and hopefully even invite you to come to Konya to present your great research. But thank you very much once again. And I would like also to thank our attendees. We have had a very, very good interest in this topic. And once again, thank you all for following. Actually, we've been live on the webinar, but we've also been live on YouTube for the first time, actually. For your information, but also for mine. I've just heard about it. So, Dragan and all, thank you very much, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, all, and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.